Wonderful. Just to be respectful of people's time, maybe let's begin, Gidon. So before
Great.
I let us introduce ourselves, I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping points. So welcome to Fertifa's webinar on how and why you should put a reproductive health support in place at your company. We're excited to talk to you about this today. So number one, the webinar is recorded. So we will be sending you a recording after this webinar if you've missed it or if you want to share it. So please be aware of using any identifiable information. The Q&A can be anonymous, but you need to tick a box to make sure when you're asking your question so that it appears as anonymous. The chat messaging is not anonymous, so just be aware of those things. So I'm joined today by Dr. Gidon Lieberman, our medical director, who is also a leading menopause specialist. Very excited, Gidon, to do this webinar with you. And together we hope to share with you the medical point of view as well as the HR point of view of why we think having a reproductive health policy or support is very important in a company. So Gidon, if you be so kind to introduce yourself first.
Okay, thanks, Roxy. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for attending. So my name is Gidon Lieberman. I'm a consultant gynecologist and specialist in reproductive medicine surgery, which means fertility, hormones. I've been involved in reproductive health since the early 2001, and I've been a defined specialist since 2004. Seems a long time. So most of my time is spent with women couples struggling with fertility journey. I spend a lot of time dealing with menopause and increasingly with men's health, moving into second stages of life with menopause and increasingly men's health issues. It's actually quite interesting. There was I was thinking about the webinar when I was this morning, and somebody was just talking about on Radio 4, there was prostate discussion going on this morning, and it just like reinforced to me that everywhere you look, there's reproductive health care in the news and the media. It's ubiquitous, and so it was actually just a bit of a timely reminder to me that actually how important this aspect of medicine, of life is, because it's just always in the media.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's so true. And we're going to be talking about how we really feel it's not just, a nice to have, but becoming a must have. Before that, let me quickly introduce myself. So I'm Céline Crawford, your host today. I run the people and operations functions at Fertifa. If you're new to Fertifa, we're Europe's leading reproductive health benefits provider, and we work very closely with employers to create more inclusive and accessible workplaces for your employees. Very excited to moderate this talk. With like a lot of people at Fertifa, we all have some experience with reproductive health. I have a personal story with reproductive health, and having been a chief people officer for 8 years prior, it gives me also a unique perspective from both sides of the coin. So excited to be talking about all things HR and RH, as we say. So at Fertifa, we love data. We're obsessed with data, actually. So before we actually begin the proper webinar, I was going to do a little poll, if you will indulge me. And I'm launching that right now. So the question is, does your organization have reproductive health support in place? If you're happy to vote, then let us know. And we'll just... Okay, people are voting now. Oh, interesting. So the majority of people who voted don't have anything in place. So you've come to the right place. I'll just let everyone put their final vote. So yes, so it looks like 60%, 65% said no, 30% yes. Some people are not sure. So I'm going to end the poll now. Thank you so much for participating. So Gidon, before we actually talk about how to have a reproductive health policy in place or why we should have a reproductive health policy in place, can we take a step back a little bit and talk about what is reproductive health? What do we mean from a medical standpoint when we talk about reproductive health?
Thanks, Céline. So when I it's an open definition, and I think that it's a term that encompasses all aspects of human reproduction. So reproduction isn't, when we talk about reproductive health, we don't just mean the defined time when a woman couple are trying to conceive. Talk about the time beforehand in very important teenage adolescent years, or maybe even the years below, but mainly teenagers, really important. And that pre-active reproductive life contraception. And it's really interesting being in a God, I hope I don't go on too much. It's really interesting being in this the fertility paradigm because actually we focus so much, like when we're at school and in our youth, about not getting pregnant, don't get pregnant, don't get pregnant, use contraception, be really careful, STIs, really careful. And then we move into sort of our early midlife with trying for pregnancies and all that means, from egg freezing to getting pregnant again, not getting pregnant, and the struggles that women couple goes through to get pregnant, and then moving into this a little bit older into the early post reproductive life. So I kind of think people talk about early perimenopause or early menopause. And then in the post reproductive life, actually, if you think about it, in today's society, you spend longer in your life after you're reproductively active. So in your post
Absolutely.
reproductive, you think about it, because you think you're actually postmenopausal longer than you are premenopausal. So it's actually a long time. And that's just the women. And then with the men, you're thinking about the fact that on a wider sense, men's reproductive health stays pretty constant, but then we sort of get other problems as we get a little bit older.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think we were talking about prostate cancer this morning, and actually how common prostate cancer is, that it's in the ways that we look at it. So, and then I think that's the very specific bits of reproductive life, but it's actually much wider than that.
Yeah.
Because once you get into it, you think about the psychological aspects of it. You think about actually family forming and what does that mean, and how all the ways of family forming, or the ways of approaching a reproductive life without families, without your own children, without your biological children, genetically related children. So it's a huge subject. So for me, when I think about reproductive healthcare, I just think about any aspect of medicine that has a reproductive aspect to it.
Absolutely. That's so well said because I think sometimes, we host these client webinars or just webinars in general, and people say, well, I'm not planning on reproducing. So, I'm not thinking about reproductive health, but we are walking around with reproductive health
Mm.
organs. So at some point in our life, we will have something to do with reproductive health. So it's super
Mm.
important that you've outlined that there. And as you say, it's so extensive. So from an HR perspective, I think what's really important is helping to inform and educate people so that they can make the right decisions, so that they can empower themselves to make those decisions, because they're going to be different for everybody, whether we're talking about fertility, having a same-sex couple or not, whether we're talking about menopause. People experience that in such an individual way, and whether companies will have policies or support in place or not, they will be going through these things anyway. And we are very lucky in the UK to have a public healthcare system. So we always say that at Fertifa. But we also unfortunately know that there are huge budget constraints on the infrastructure, and the system cannot offer enough support. So unfortunately, there are exclusions and restrictions for people getting access. Is that what you see, Gidon? Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah. So it's so I didn't actually say that I'm the medical director of Fertifa, so
Yes.
probably shouldn't have done that in the introduction. So I've been with Fertifa since its outset, and before that, I was primarily and still remain an NHS clinician consultant at the the sharp edge, or the coalface of public medicine in the UK. So I spent half my time there and half of my time with Fertifa now. And yeah, there are challenges within the NHS. It's a great system, but you just need to open the newspaper to see the challenges that we face within the NHS. The quality of care pretty much is very good. I think that with reproductive health care, and this is what I deal with in the NHS. Large aspects of it are poorly funded, and that's traditionally poorly funded. And increasingly, as public funding and public spending gets squeezed, there's going to be a prioritization of what issues are going to be proactively managed in the NHS. For me, as an NHS clinician, I'm sad to see that reproductive healthcare is getting squeezed. It ebbs and flows, and over the past 15 years, there's been a lot more money put into menopause care. And
Oh,
that it is much to do, but still gaps. What's really interesting, I was just listening to what you were saying there, Celine, is that actually, if you think about it on a biological sense, we're all here kind of, or evolutionarily here to reproduce. Now, humans are lucky because we can make the active choice of not reproducing. And it's very important that we include that in the conversation, because lots and lots of people make an active decision not to want to have their own kids, and they may want to think about other ways of family forming. It's very important that we can make that active decision. And for me, the most important, when I teach medical students, I teach doctors, and I teach people about it, the most important person in the equation is the woman couple. And we should be focusing our care and our attention on them. And an important part of that is for them to be able to make truly informed decisions. What do I mean about that? I mean, making decisions about their future and their health based on information that is accurate, up to date, evidence based, in a form that they can understand. And working in the public system, that's quite difficult to quite difficult to do. And for me, the big difference between the groups that I see in the NHS and the groups that I see through Fertifa are that I see we have the potential with Fertifa, with reproductive healthcare for employees, that you speak to well people. So you're speaking to people before they've had problems,
yeah.
and you're able to take in stuff if you're not under pressure. And we're also able to disseminate information in a very independent way. So the advice that we give in the clinical team about a process, a pathology, a problem, or whatever, is independent. So we don't say, oh, you should go to this. This is the right, because there's a financial benefit for us. We just give very open, independent advice, which is very refreshing. So the advice that I give in the NHS is the same advice that I would give in with Fertifa, but in a more open way, in a way that we can explain things to people in a better way. But actually, it's just being able to disseminate information before there's a problem. And I think that's a very, very interesting way of providing health, a very interesting health model.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, educating, so you prevent almost, instead of, having to heal afterwards. So
Yeah,
taking just an
absolutely.
example in reproductive health, let's say endometriosis. So
Okay.
we know that it takes sometimes 7 years for someone to be diagnosed with endometriosis.
Yeah.
Some people take 17 days off because they have endometriosis, because it can be quite debilitating from a work perspective. It costs the UK ecosystem about £8 billion a year. So how can about saying this is a must have, not a nice to have, what would you say using that as an example?
Using the endo as an example, and as a condition that only women get, where the lining of the womb, what we call the endometrium, migrates to other places in the body, normally outside, around the organs in the abdominal cavity. And when those areas get the hormonal stimulation to be active to bleed, then you get these active areas of bleeding inside the abdomen. And once that happens, it can be debilitating for pain, and it has knock-ons with fertility and with bowel function, and also and well-being. And I see women who have horrific horrific pain, and they may have been well looked after, or they may have been poorly looked after. But actually being able to educate the work environment about what's going on is very important. So structures can be provided for those individuals to be able to work better in an environment where their problems are understood. because I'm not going to be able to cure somebody's endometriosis. If only I could, it'd be wonderful. Just take this and it'll go away. But for many conditions, and endometriosis is a chronic condition, it goes on and on. We have to find and support the individual through their entire reproductive journey. So for instance, endo, she may have really bad pain when she's younger. And how do we address that? And she's a bit older. How do we address the fertility aspects? And what do we do when she's finished her reproductive life? But we can talk through that and we can support women through that, but also supporting the workplace. So there's we haven't really touched on it, but like we can introduce a cultural environment where it's understood why this individual needs to take time off. She doesn't want to take time off.
Of
Nobody
course.
wants to take time off because they've got this embarrassing. They don't want to take time off. They want to come to work. They want to be a productive member of the team, and we should support them and create a culture where they can do that. And so I kind of think what you're asking me, what would we do for that in Fertifa? We would educate the individual, would educate the workplace about why this is happening. And then on the individual level, we will be able to talk through the options that would hopefully be available based on the best information that we have at the time. Endo is a difficult condition to manage, but there are lots and lots of women who have their endo well controlled.
Yeah.
We can help women with endo have kids where maybe 20, 30 years ago that they might have not been able to have kids. And we can talk about the options that they would have. But I think it's this idea of actually educating the individual and putting stuff into practice in the workplace that can support the individual.
Wonderful. You created my next segue, which
Okay.
is perfect. So really, our next section is talking about, how do we put that reproductive health support in place? I think often people come to us and say, we don't have big budgets or we don't know where to start. And really, at the end of the day, it's not always about money, etc. It's about, as you say, having the right culture and creating that safe psychological space where people feel they can go ask questions and talk to their managers or their HR teams, that they have the right resources and the right culture in place to be able to do that. So there's a few things here that we can talk about. Let's continue about what it's like to work with a health provider like Fertifa or like other providers when it comes to menopause, fertility, or family forming. So Gidon, let's go back to the example you gave. An example where somebody comes to you and let's say, we know now that, more than half the population is going to go through menopause. So working population, they're worried about having menopause. How would you help them in that journey, and how will that help them be, I guess, more productive eventually and be a better place at work?
Yeah, thanks for that, Celine. I think that it doesn't need to be very expensive because I think there's this thing about actually we're not going to be doing something that costs a lot. What we're doing is support through education and talking. And I kind of think you just touched on there is actually the normalization of this. So as you said, 50% of the population, and I think you probably got more of the figures than I do, but probably a higher percentage of the population or return to work population of women in the late 30s, 40s, and 50s are going to struggle with hormonal changes. And this isn't specialist stuff. This is half the population. And in my own mindset, menopause care needs to be taken out of the hands of specialist doctors and into society as a whole. Menopause isn't weird. Women don't want to go through menopause, but it's going to happen. And moving away from this very medicalized approach to menopause is to create an understanding that it's going to happen and how do we deal with this. This is an inevitability. This isn't it may happen, it will happen. And some women are lucky and they have few symptoms. Other women have severe symptoms, but most women are somewhere in between. So for me, it's an inexpensive explanation about why it happens and about how to manage menopause. Now, everybody thinks I'm a doctor, I'm just going to prescribe drugs, but that's just one aspect of it. And it's one aspect of it. it's more important to get over that. There are structures that we can implement. There's explanations that we can give to individuals and to groups and to different groups, and so that women in the workplace can be supported in going through that. And it's really just a case of managers, line managers, and companies creating a space, building a space where discussions can happen. And it may be, I don't know, an in-house sort of WhatsApp group, or we've got lots of ideas for how we can support women going through menopause, but actually to understand that this is something that is going to happen. You can't, this isn't, these aren't things that may happen. These are things that will
Will
happen,
happen, exactly.
will happen.
Yeah, yeah,
And, is that stuff about known knowns and unknown unknowns or whatever. This is going to happen. You've got to be prepared for it. Menopause is going to affect the individual. If it affects the individual, it's going to affect the work. You've
yeah,
got to have something in place. It's not that it may, and there's lots that can be done about it. So I kind of just think it's just building this culture, the environment. I was talking just like I'm talking too much, but I was talking to a patient of mine this week about her periods. She's got terrible periods. She spends 2 weeks of the month with really, really bad periods. Two
wow,
weeks of the month, okay? 2 weeks a month. And a lot of those 2 weeks, she can't go to work because it's just too awful for her. And then I was talking to her about, her new offices and thinking about where her desk is going to be because she can't be too far from the loo and she's got anxiety about it. So there's so much of actual changes that we can make to how we view reproductive health, how we view the offices, how we view our approach. And she said to me, I'm really lucky because my line manager's wife has got a problem, and so I can go to them and we can discuss it. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm really pleased for her, but actually, it shouldn't be the lucky one. That should just be how it is. I've got a medical problem. It's not great, and I want to do, or I've just got the normal menopause. I need some space. I need whatever, whatever, whatever. There has to be a culture that allows that to
yeah.
happen.
Wonderful. So you touched on something very important. So one was training managers and educating people. So companies do this in a different way. As I said, you have to look at your company, you have to talk to your people, do a survey, understand where the needs are. You can have guest speakers, you can have champions, you can have employee work groups. These are all kind of free ways of
Mm.
making sure that education is taking place and happening. Employee assistant programs as well. We had a question that's come in that's very, very, very good. Where would you start with a limited budget, menopause, fertility, or general approach? So what I'm trying to say is, even with no budget, you can give people clarity. So you can have policies in place so that people understand if they're going through pregnancy loss, 1 in 4 pregnancies and in miscarriages, or if they're going to menopause or whatever it is, they understand clearly, do they have flexibility to work away from home? Do they have flexibility to take time off? If you're doing IVF, you may do a survey that tells you, I'd love to have a little fridge for my injectables. Maybe that's part of their, wellness budget. It will depend on your company and what you have. But how, Gidon, can we make sure that, these policies are inclusive, and that we're using the right language?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a challenge for a lot of companies, and we as individuals need to look inside ourselves actually at the language that we use and actually at our audience, the culture within the company. And I think the answer to the question about where should we start, I think the first step is the acknowledgement that there are reproductive health challenges. I think that is the first step, actually, and that's where I would begin. And actually, once you've got that space, you can fill it with your different things, whether it be menopause, fertility, whatever, whatever, whatever. And there's not one person that I've ever met in my life, maybe I've got a bit of a target audience, that has not had a challenge in their reproductive life. Okay, there is nobody out there. So when we talk about inclusivity, by definition, everybody's included in this conversation. Now, everybody's got different bits to it. Okay. this bit, this bit, this bit, this bit. But everybody has a reproductive health challenge of some sort. So when we talk about inclusivity, this is everybody, and it's an ideal that we all acknowledge that everybody's got problems, issues, challenges, quite word, and that they all need to be addressed. And to be inclusive, we first have to make this space. We have to, and I keep on coming back to it, but we have to build a culture where we recognize that everybody from everybody will have challenges.
And that comes,
I can just tell you that
yeah, yeah,
everybody
yeah.
will.
And that comes from the top, right? Making sure that, because it's all well and good having policies, but if they're not lived, or if, the management team or the executive team are doing one thing but saying another, that creates a lot of confusion and it's not a safe space. So that has to come from the top and be mirrored in terms of the inclusive culture.
Absolutely. Reproductive health challenges do not know your job title. They just
I
come.
love that. Yeah, yeah.
They just come.
I love that. So, there's a lot of things you could do. Going back to the question, um, you know, survey your employees, see what you have to work with. There's a lot of tips in terms of doing your policies. Advice, for example, if you're doing a pregnancy loss policy, do it separate from a pregnancy policy because they're very different things. If you're doing a menopause policy, like with that individual you mentioned, Gidon, there's practical things that the individual will need or will need to hear. For example, I need my desk to be next to the toilets because I'm going to be going every once in a while.
Mm.
And that you might not know as a manager or HR, and you will get that information from the people that you're helping. And it's an iterative process, right? It's okay to say we don't know all the answers. We need to start with something, and then we'll build on it as we go, with people's experiences, with our own knowledge. And it's a living document, and it's a living thing that grows with the company.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on the number of, I was talking before about people who don't have menopausal symptoms. And often I'll say to women in a menopause consult, say, what are your symptoms like? Did your mum have a menopause? And a big stock answer is, oh, we don't talk about that sort of thing. We, never had that conversation with my mum, never really had that conversation. But when you press they'll say, okay, well, my mum stopped work in her late 40s, early 50s. She couldn't deal with it. She had a bit of a breakdown. It just wasn't work. And I see women all the time that stop working in that age because of menopausal symptoms. And what I see is it's kind of like goes under the radar a little bit. She's left work because she wants to do X, Y, and Z. And actually, the real fundamental is if she was supported, if that individual was looked after and better, was given the freedom to go through whatever she's going through with a supportive environment, she would not have left. And for me, that is the greatest tragedy, because if then there's a whole waterfall of problems after that individual leaves work. And it's so I think it's just actually again creating a culture where people can discuss their reproductive health challenges.
Absolutely. So recent surveys show that 59% now choose a company which offers fertility benefits, and segregating that category into millennials, 70% of millennials are quitting to change jobs for a company who are providing fertility benefits. This is just fertility. But more and more, we know that people are looking to their employer to give answers and not necessarily to the healthcare system. And so it's a trend definitely that we are seeing. So we're getting to our final section of the webinar,
Oh,
which I feel like we've touched on already. Sorry,
just lost
if
you.
you have,
Just lost you for a second. You got you
yeah.
now. Yeah, back.
That was strange. Apologies for that. Yeah, so we're getting to our important part about why is reproductive health important. We covered employee well-being and productivity, so I'm not going to go through that. The second one, attracting and retaining the best people. So we've talked about a couple of stats as to why it's important. And finally, DEI. So for diversity and inclusion, so that's something that comes up a lot in terms of reproductive health support, how it can contribute to the workplace. What are your thoughts on that, Gidon?
I think it's. I was just smiling at myself because DI medicine stands for donor insemination, and I was thinking, oh, I'm sure we weren't going to
Sorry,
be. I'm sure.
diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah. Is I mean, is this still something that needs to be for me, working in this aspect of medicine, you see everything, every sort of um, uh, everybody from society will come and see me at some point. From not everybody in society, but every sections from all bits of society will come and see me because reproductive life and challenges are ubiquitous to humankind. So we all face it. And it's really, for me and for those of us that work in reproductive health care, it's so important that we focus not on which bits of society or which gender, but actually the reproductive health challenges that an individual have. And there's been a paradigm change in reproductive medicine over the past 15 years that's been slightly behind societal changes, but also maybe slightly in front of societal changes. Because remember, we've been advocating, for instance, the use of donor insemination for same-sex women or women without male partners who wanted to have a family. And so this group of women who were ostracized, and in my lifetime, and certainly my parents' lifetime, these women were never allowed to function in wider society. Now we just think of it as a norm. So I think there's always this constant change of what is acceptable to society and what's acceptable in reproductive health. But all I can say is that everybody has reproductive health issues, and we see everybody we see everybody because everybody has it, and yeah, there are different flavors, and yeah, there are different presentations, but actually we like that in reproductive health because it makes our job interesting. So I think everybody's is included with this.
Absolutely. People from all walks of life, different sexual orientation, gender, relationship status, economic status. And we often comment on the fact that, companies could have the best parental leave policies, for example, in the world to demonstrate DEI efforts. But if they're not helping the LGBTQ community, or if they've not thought about that community, then that's no use to a lot of people who are working for them. So just deeply committed and making sure that, we are thinking of everyone in that sense. I guess finally, why is it important? People need it. I can speak from personal experience. So, I've been pregnant 4 times, but I have 2 kids. So I've had a molar pregnancy. I've had a very late miscarriage. And I think if I had access to the proper support, it would have made, a big difference to me personally. I'm sure you see a lot of that, Gidon, with people every day. But just to end, I guess, why do you think reproductive health is important? Just from a personal perspective.
I think, well, listen, personally, because everybody faces it. Me, middle-aged man, what reproductive healthcare challenges do I have? I'm getting older. Bits of me aren't working as well. And as we get older, us men, our prostates go a bit. That's a challenge. Yeah, it happens to me, it happens to everybody. That's, it's a bit, I'm a bit embarrassed about it, but it happens to everybody. All reproductive health challenges happen to everybody. And I think it's really important because you want to make a happy individual in the workplace. Um, you want to create this culture because then you realize that everybody my age has got funny little problems like this, and there are options. And actually, if we're all able to discuss it, maybe not in the open, but we're able to discuss it within the workplace, and the workplace isn't um, it is a much happier place to be. And I'm not a psychologist, but I imagine that a happier employer is a better employee. So I kind of think this is a two-way thing. And we haven't really spoken about the effect of reproductive health on the individual, but actually how the reproductive health challenges can affect the individual at work and this interplay. So like fertility, how somebody going through fertility treatment, is the outcome influenced by the work environment? It's a very interesting piece of work, but
Oh,
this interplay, and something that you can explore. But why is it important? Because we all have problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's also stats around people going through fertility, being more stressed by their manager at work rather than their partner
Yeah.
or something else. So that's also well known. So it is very, very important, to have the right environment. And that's why people are wanting to work for companies who are inclusive in that sense and have that support. All right, wonderful. So as we close, I wanted to open it up to questions. If you have a question, just pop it into the Q&A box. Just a reminder, if you want it to be anonymous, just tick the anonymous, and we can go from there. So I'm going to give it a couple of minutes. That's a really good question that's come in, Gidon. Where would you start with a male-dominated environment?
Okay, so
yeah.
can I just start that one? So first of all, men. So men have everybody suffers from reproductive health. So I've just explained on a personal level the sort of challenges that a middle-aged man will face. Younger men have different challenges. But before I go into that, I think again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, is actually to say, and actually to say to people in a way, everybody here, everybody in the male-dominated environment will have reproductive health challenges, or they will be living with or trying to support somebody, partner, a sibling, friend with reproductive health challenges. So I think it's just the acknowledgement that this happens, and actually to face the barrier and say this is happening, and we're gonna talk about it, and um, and these are the issues that we have. So you might have some issues for younger men, those who are trying to have kids, and like an older person myself. So for younger people think, well, young men don't have any problems, but they do. So we all recognize the suicide risks in young men, which obviously are not only important for reproductive, but so important. And then I see an increasing number of young men who are using performance enhancing drugs and steroids, and actually what that does to their overall health. I will speak to young men about sexually transmitted infections. I'll talk about contraception, and then to the middle-aged, more older men, I'll talk about fertility. So again, it's just this acknowledgement that they are going to have challenges, whether they have them now or in the future, they will have challenges. And so I gave just what,
Yeah.
so
No.
I
Yeah.
gave,
Go for it.
yeah. So I had to give a talk to a group of young men. Somebody said, "Can I talk to a group of young men in their 20s, late teens, early 20s about menopause?" Okay. And it was for me, as somebody involved in patient care, it was just eye-opening. It was just amazing. And because I said to them, we had like one of those scatter boards that you can type in a word. And I said, write me one word that you think about when I say menopause. And it was just amazing. And actually, there was very little, almost zero biological understanding of why the menopause happens.
Right. Right.
And there were sort of these connotations. So, the one word would be mom, old,
Right.
it'll be grumpy, it'll be, this, that, and the other. And actually, and then they sort of had no sort of idea about what that would mean. So I said to them, I remember just getting, trying to get the points across. And I said, well, imagine waking up one day, your body's changed greatly. You're no longer your young self. You look a bit pudgy and a bit old. You've got no sex drive. One minute you're crying, one minute you're happy, and you can't go to work.
Mm.
And and actually to put it into black and white, quite stark, for some men is good. But that's just an extreme example. What I would say is create an environment where the acknowledgement of reproductive healthcare challenges and tailor it to whatever group you're looking at.
Yeah, I'm just going to answer the question differently in case the person meant for example, it's a female in a male-dominated environment, and how do you ensure that you have fertility policies in place or menopause policies in place? So all what you said still stands, but I think I have worked in male-dominated environments most of my life. I think something that works really well, which we've touched upon already, is having that leadership buying. So making sure that the person who is going to be making the budget decisions or the go-ahead, or leading by example, is on board with what you're about to do. And secondly, the power of data. I think that's worked extremely well in showing that an employee base wants something, or really showing data either at what other companies are doing so that you stay competitive in the market. Anything that's business related really helps in terms of at least starting the conversation and getting that going. So I'll just answer that from that perspective as well. We have another question, Gidon. This is probably more for you. What kind of clinical support is most impactful when looking at reproductive health employee benefit? Is it a treatment budget, or would it be something like counseling?
Can I come into just to tack on to the end of your last
Sure, go for
piece?
it.
And I kind of think that if maybe another avenue there would be that, and I'm just in my mind, I'm just seeing this one woman in this office of men, and she doesn't feel comfortable going to talk to her line manager about whatever's going on. That's okay, because I think that's an important role that we have in Fertifa. That person can pick up the phone or email us, and we will help. I think that's a really it,
I think if they don't have Fertifa, though, what would you say? If they're not working with a health provider and it's something that they have to do themselves.
I think well, if we're not helping them, it's difficult. I think that there are lots and lots and lots of good resources around. I'm very, very mindful about saying go and speak to your general practitioner about these things, because they're often overloaded. I think it's going to be trying to my first step in this. My first step would be actually to go to somebody in HR and say, listen, we need to look at how we're going to approach
Yes.
reproductive health. I would go HR and say, or some kind of policy for reproductive. So it's actually to create it. That's probably where I would go with that.
Okay. Super. So next question was
The
about clinical support. So is treatment budget or is counseling more impactful?
so it's you can't have one without the other, I think, is the unasked answer. And I would look as counseling as a treatment, or to be used along with sort of more traditional treatment options. Now, we all need support. We all need somebody to talk to, and maybe somebody to talk to, and counseling is the treatment. That might be the treatment finished, but there might be other treatments or investigations or whatever processes that would go hand in hand with it. So you can't say our reproductive health is just counseling, because that's just one aspect of it. And actually, when we talk about counseling, is it sort of medical counseling about what the treatment options are, or is it counseling just to talk about how our own feelings impact on ourselves and others? So I don't think it's one answer or the other, but counseling is something that we advise for lots and lots and lots of our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as we said, it will depend on the individual itself, and because every case is a bit different, but they kind of go hand in hand, don't they?
Maybe the other part of this question is, what sort of clinical support. So we talk through some examples. It may be that somebody needs clinical support for their desires to egg freeze. Then we would explain what the process would involve. We may arrange investigations for them. Might take them through a whole consultation about what egg freezing involves, depending on what how we involve ourselves with the company itself, with the employer itself. So for a menopause, it may be speaking to one of our menopause advisors and an explanation of what resources are available in the public domain, and then actually going forward with maybe a menopause consultation, just depending.
Wonderful. All right. Let's see if there are any final questions. Otherwise, we'll wrap up. So to sum up, so everybody has reproductive health. So we're all going to go through some reproductive health challenge in our life. How do we put a reproductive health policy in place or support? Think of policies, working with a provider, training and education for managers. As we said, listening to our people. We think it's important because everyone has reproductive health organs, but also it will affect well-being, productivity, the types of people that we attract and retain, and obviously diversity and inclusion. Have I got everything, Gidon?
I think so.
Okay, wonderful. So I want to thank everyone for attending. I am popping in the chat a link to our team if you're interested in having more of a chat. We love talking reproductive health. We love hearing stories, whether it's your personal story or a work story. Do get in touch. Thank you so much, Gidon. It was wonderful. I always learn from you. Even though we work together, I always learn from you. And I hope this was valuable for other people as well. So thank you so much for joining
Thanks, Céline.
the recording. Bye, everyone.